Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Creator Summit. My name is Heather, and I'm a vice journalist in Singapore. So I guess maybe a question to our experts and stuff. Do you guys want to kick us off and tell us more about how climate change impacts our mental health, psychology?
I found an article published in International Journal of Environmental Research on public health, and it was really a nice paper. It's a scoping review of 120 different papers. So it talks about climate change and mental health. So there's a lot of things that they talked about. There are two studies that strike me the most. It was a study in some specific regions in Taiwan. It talks about how the temperature and humidity really, especially if you're exposed to it for a long term and it's fluctuating, it would influence your mental health and well-being. So there was also, based on that study, they've seen that the observable increase of 7% on the major depressive disorder in the region. And in every one, according to the study, every 1 degree Celsius of increase of the temperature. So this is not surprising, as we know that some mood disorders are actually related to climate.
Really, one of the overwhelming encapsulating terms, grief. That grief consists of sadness, anger, fear, despair, and sometimes even depression is included in there. So there's a whole range of feelings that are stirred up. And in fact, the term climate anxiety is really perhaps can be a little bit of the wrong term because it sort of tends to pathologise people when it actually may be climate distress. It really legitimises the sort of feelings that people have.
I think personally it's been very draining, mainly because there are so few wins in the climate and environmental space because the situation, as you know, keeps getting worse, and our world leaders often make promises that they don't always fulfill. So we're always at the crossroad where things get worse, they keep making more promises, and scientists have actually said limiting emissions below 1.5 degrees is the way ahead. And a lot of world leaders think that is ambitious. And I think that's really scary because 1.5 degrees is still going to be very bad for us. And I don't want to get into too much climate jargon, but just the fact that the bare minimum, according to the scientists, is considered ambitious from our world leaders is very, very concerning. It really makes us question what kind of future we're headed towards, or if the world leaders really care about people, and what, even if since our present is already so bad, how much worse it's going to get. And just the fact that not only are we working on making it better, sometimes we actively work on destroying it. In India, we're opening up coal mines, we're partaking in massive deforestation projects. And hearing about all of this gives me personally a lot of anxiety because sometimes it makes me feel like what we're doing is not enough, but also at the same time, it's not in our control. And it's not in the hands of one person, like an ordinary citizen. So it's definitely very overwhelming sometimes to be a part of the movement because you're worried about what is to come.
A study in Australia talked about the experience of the Australian farmers. So these farmers reported an increased level of drought-related stress, which they describe as worry. And this worry is anchored to themselves, to their families, and to the community in general. So mental health was influenced, not just the climate per se, but the negative consequences or the impact of the climate change. One thing that I also find it interesting about their trend and how they actually discuss it is that 77% of those studies are conducted to high-income countries. So this actually belongs, some of the studies belongs to Australia, some from Canada, some from the US, and only just 3% belongs to the low or middle income countries, which, as we know, that these countries has more factors to consider, like poverty, social and political instability, and of course, conflict. And these could further aggravate or further severe some mental health conditions.
But in your opinion, what are some of the present consequences on environmental degradation and climate change on our health, both physically and mentally? And do you have any, specific case examples that you've seen where you are?
Other than the physical component of that, I thought I'd probably just shift my response a little bit and just, I really wanted to highlight that not one size fits all, and often Western concepts or psychological concepts are framed from a mainstream perspective, right? And so what that does is it kind of minimizes the voices of, say, Pacific peoples in the region. And we know that there's a huge magnifying glass over the region. And I guess what is missing from this conversation is that land, although it's used for like capital and work-based utility and by some it's considered to be more than that. Our land is intimately connected to our whole well-being, our mental health and well-being, but also we consider the land being our ancestors. So when that is threatened in any kind of way, you can just imagine the significant impact that will have on our migrational histories, our placement, our positioning, our belonging. And so I feel it's really important that Pacific peoples in the climate change debate have more volume and a stronger platform.
I know my friend in Philippines, she's always afraid of getting her house flooded. In Argentina, they're always afraid of one or the other climate calamities. And in India, we are always afraid of a variety of climate calamities, especially this year. We've had a lot of cyclones impact a lot of people, especially small coastal towns. And some of my friends were actually stuck in the cyclone and they were out of electricity for a few days and we couldn't reach them, we couldn't talk to them. It was a very frightening experience because this happens quite often and we've had so many cyclones this year that it feels normal even though it shouldn't be, like the amount of times it happens. And this is only increasing for a lot of other people around the world. And I think what was especially shocking was when Germany was hit with massive floods. They were quite shocked because it doesn't normally happen in Germany that their houses get collapsed, their roads caved in. Especially because Germany isn't one of those countries normally impacted by climate as much. And I think that really awakened a lot of people in the global north, essentially, to the severity of the climate crisis of what we face here every single day.
So I've read an article in the conversation, and it talked about the experience of the female farmers in Mindanao. So this happened in 2017. They described the series of events by that time. These women were actually widows of the deceased combatants. So as a result of the violence, as well as the droughts that has been, and as well as the typhoon that has been happening in the Philippines for the decades, these women were forced to move from one place to another. And because of that, they have kind of difficulty to cope emotionally and financially. And with that, it leads them to fell to the different thing, including the children, into human trafficking, sexual abuse, as well as prostitution. And some actually resort to the exchange of sexual favor just for food. And they locally describe it as, we term it isang gabi isang salop, which is actually literally mean just a partition for a food.
Thanks for sharing, Novi. I think it's all quite distressing to hear. I guess moving on, building on, adding on to that, I do have a question for our experts, Carol and Jemima. How would you guys know, or could you guys share any strategies or tools that, like young people especially could be using to deal with the psychological effects of climate change on mental health?
Look, our group does a lot of work with activists, and we offer people the opportunity in a workshop setting to express their feelings in a safe place in a small group. And we know that giving people the opportunity to express what they feel and to be heard by other people and to have their feelings validated is enormously helpful psychologically, because people feel, what I'm feeling, I'm not alone, this is legitimate, there are other people feeling as I do. And that is really critical for people's mental health. They are so focused on what they're doing as an activist or as a scientist or researcher that they often are carrying the feelings without expressing them, and that is not good. I mean, the other is that the risk of burnout is a really critical issue. And so, again, sort of not only giving people a chance to speak about their feelings, but also giving them some skills and some tools for helping them care for themselves and for them to recognise that they need to care for themselves, that they can't just keep going hell for leather on this work, even though it's of critical importance, that they're not going to be of any use if they can't look after themselves. And so one of the things we offer in a workshop is some ways of helping people care for themselves and have some compassion for themselves as well as those they're working with. And that's really an eye-opener for people because they've often not thought about themselves. And again, to do that in a group is really important.
And a lot of the time, people are losing out on being like a normal teenager or being like a normal young adult because they're so involved in the work they do. And we wanted to also make sure that that doesn't happen. And there is still a safe space for young people to do young people things like watch a movie, go out, climb trees. And another thing we have found that's really super effective is just going back to nature, especially in my local FFF. Every meeting we have that's in person is always at a park. We always climb trees. We always have a picnic. This is just a way to ensure that we're close to nature so that it reinforces why we're fighting A. And also it's just, it's so beautiful. It really does calm us. There are lots of studies that prove the effectiveness of being in nature for a calmer mind. And it really helps us personally because we get to see a lot of squirrels and a lot of birds. And it's just a very nice connected feeling. We're connected to the nature. We're connected to an ecosystem and to each other. And these are just some of the things we do to make sure that, we aren't super burnt out. And we also take like rests or breaks in the middle. Or we just take a whole weekend off without checking our phones and being more mindful of what we consume.
And I think this is quite an important thing whenever we talk about mental health in general. Like, it's the process of grieving as well. Like, there's always the, coping mechanisms that we have and face, but I don't think we talk enough about grief. And I guess on the issue of climate change, Novi, is there anything you want to share about, supporting those in Mindanao actually and mourning what they lost? Because it does seem like a lot of things happen in the Philippines and so fast. And how do you deal with like so much loss?
In the Mindanao for now, we're actually trying to establish a stronger mental health system, not just covering climate, but as what we're concerned in the conflict. So right now, if people are actually, we're trying to support people in especially the government on strengthening their capacity. So we are doing a lot of multi-layered intervention, like what we're doing here. So we believe that the people is actually, they deserve to have an access of different range of mental health support, coming from basic psychological support from the community level up to specialized support that we believe in psychological and psychiatric level. So in ICRC, what we're doing is we're not just mobilizing the mental health professional, but we also put inclusion to the other members of the ecosystem of mental health care, which includes social worker. We tap health workers, and because they're the caregivers on the field. And we also try to train them how to really get refer cases that they identify from below. And then we also not underestimate the importance of the community and the religious leaders to provide this care, because oftentimes, especially people from the ground, they're the first people they run to or to go to. So we really give also priority on them. So for now, what we're doing concretely in the ICRC is that we're training these people, the religious leader and the community leaders, and also the social workers and the health workers. We synthesize them, we train them how to provide like a basic mental health support, including the referral. And for those who can actually do the mental health workers. We are actually training them in what we call advanced psychological care, where we train them, this psychometrician in the government, to have the knowledge and skills on supporting the people that are referred to them. So our focus here is not just directly treating people, but we're building a strong support the mental health system in Mindanao.
Actually, Dr. Jemima, I would actually love to hear more about Indigenous spirituality and actually deeper ways of connecting in nature. I guess because you're all like in different parts of the world and it's something that's really like relatively quite new to us. Is there anything you could share on that area of interest?
Well, obviously with the closure of borders, we're seeing that people can't quite go back home, and that you're seeing that fatigue or that distress and almost depression and not being connected to your land. So I've seen that in my own experiences. And I also wanted to make the point that I don't think people are necessarily seeing the interlink between mental health and climate change, these global giants that I think, that need to be addressed. And so there's huge inequities around that. I'm speaking from my experience. I'm doing some research right now, which is now a little bit delayed because of obviously the closures of the borders, which, engages Pacific countries like Niue and the Cook Islands and some of the stuff that we're doing here. And so it's talking with Pacific peoples themselves, hearing their narratives. How do they frame climate change? How do they frame mental health and well-being? And these are countries that are already under-resourced in terms of mental health services. So you have the climate change on top of that, and things are just exacerbated even more. So psychologically, I think we're going to see, and spiritually, we're going to see huge impacts and just some adverse impacts upon, not just the now, but generations to come if we don't seriously try and make the connection, I guess, between the two.
Well, I live in a country where climate change has been a political tension point for years. We've lost about 5 prime ministers over the issue. So, but I don't know that it's, I don't know the political situation in Singapore, but I do know that has seemed helpless, and we've felt helpless for a long time, but gradually things do move if people are tenacious and work out ways of actually electing people who are sympathetic. So it's a slow road, and I'm really sympathetic to people who are impeded in that, but tenacity is really required. But also support for each other is so critical to help people go, not acting in isolation and as an individual. There have been studies, it's a UK study of climate activists and scientists who showed that while people were initially very active, they sometimes got to a point where they had a bit of a crisis and they had to reassess and reevaluate what they were doing and how much where were they best to put their energy, what were they best skilled at, what's their best way of contributing. And once they did come out of that crisis and reassess what they could do, they were able to contribute in a much more balanced way. They were able to assess what they would put their time into, what they wouldn't. They were able to turn off their social media at times and not have it all the time be bombarded with information. And in that way, they were able to build resilience so that they actually could engage in the way that they wanted to. And often that was just a cycle that went on again. They'd have another crisis might occur where there was need to make some further changes in what they're engaged in and how much time they put in and what support they need. And they'd go on again and reassess and then go on. And there's been evidence that people have done that and quite successfully stayed engaged in this issue by really being watchful of what they're suited to in their personality as a contribution.
I think it's very encouraging when movements just join in and they're like, we're taking a break for 2 days, 4 days, and they post about it. And it's just a reminder that other movements, including yourself, need to take a break. And it is okay to take a break. And I think one important thing that I read recently is that the burden of solving the climate crisis shouldn't have to be on young people, firstly, and it shouldn't especially have to be on a small group of young people or one person. So I think personally, when I get super anxious, I think that's what I like to remind myself of, that it is not in my power. Yes, I can, lobby governments. Yes, I can, organize mass protests, and that is great. And that is great when I'm doing it alone, or when I'm doing it with other people, or with the movement. But it's also important to take a break, because there is also only one of me. So I think that this kind of behavior, we also talk about it on our social media, and that is really encouraging for other people, because it reinforces that they alone can't do this. And I think that's really important, because a lot of time the hero complex comes in. That's really harmful for activists.
Resilience building is also like knowing the coping strategies of the people. And I would like to really, when we're talking about it, I think I always try to remember, as well as as worker, that the coping strategy is one thing. If it's individual, it should be like personal. So one coping strategy cannot be copy pasted to other. It could be different from one another. So it's something that you need to also explore with the person. And secondly, when it comes to community, and really like bringing in community. So with the community level, it's more on cultural, because one culture may cope in specific incident or specific event differently from another culture. So for me, as a Filipino, I would like to really share to you what I can speak, how really I could see how Filipino community cope with their our experiences on both conflict and climate change. So I think Filipino, I would say, is quite known for also being resilient with this. So we're actually effectively coping in terms of first religiosity, because Filipinos has religious. It's not just religious, but also they have a faith. So this kind of thing is actually helping them. Another thing is the Filipinos are family oriented. So social network is quite really important for them to really cope. Another thing is the sense of humor. The positivity of the Filipino trait is really like, for me, remarkable. I think I've seen memes before when there was a disaster where they sharing, it's just during the disaster, and you can see the positivity there. And as well as the bayanihan spirit. We call it bayanihan. It's like helping each other in times of difficulties. And we have also the cultural trait of being flexible. And I think all these things that is culturally shared by the Filipinos is actually helping us as well to really lessen the burden or the psychological distress that we're experiencing in both things.
I think what I can contribute to the discussion right now is that we tend to also, I guess, ignore, in quote marks, our elders or our traditional knowledge holders. I mean, these guys have been through crazy shit in their lifetimes, generations before us. And so I think it's really important that we are very cognizant of the intergenerational solutions that can come about from addressing both mental health and climate change, right? And they're just wells of knowledge. And I'm a firm believer that you have to go back in order to go forward.
So we're coming to the end of our panel soon. And I guess maybe I just want to close with this question, and let's go around and see what each of you guys think. Like for each of you personally, what is something actually that inspires you, sustains, and motivates your work?
I think for me, what really actually inspires me as MHP, as a field officer, is whenever I see people going, because we usually are in this kind of field, we see the people in their difficulties, and eventually they find their own feet to stand and regain their life. So it's like from the moment that they lose this control over their life, and they regain it eventually. And whenever I see that actually sustains me to really continue working with the people on the ground, and the people, especially in this context in Mindanao and the humanitarian context. So I think that is actually the one that gratifies me as a person.
What inspires me is working with a team of colleagues who support each other and actually practice what we're preaching, in the sense that we're there for each other, we offer a place to each other to say and express what we're really feeling at the time, and offer support to each other and also practice self-care activities together. And that keeps me going, because I just love working with a group of people that I trust. And that's actually what we're trying to offer to the community in our workshops too, is exactly the same thing. So it's really deeply engaging for me.
The people I work with inspire me to keep going every single day, just because how they're so resilient towards everything that comes their way. They're so strong, and they love so fiercely their community, each other, and their love for the planet that keeps them going. Honestly, that's the most inspiring thing ever, and I'm so grateful to be working with the people that I am, because they're absolutely amazing. And I think I especially love the writers in our community, because their words are so powerful, and that's really motivating for me.
In terms of being inspired and being motivated to do what I do, it's hand on heart people, and my family. It's where I've come from. It's also using a platform to be able to speak for those who are voiceless or are muzzled in a way that is completely out of their control. And so that completely inspires me. The students at the university, at Pacific Studies, absolute inspiration. And obviously the migrational histories of my parents and my family and our ancestors in that. Because I believe that each and every one of us, are guardians. We're stewards of this globe, of this planet. And the way we're treating it is we're just completely disrespecting it.